Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's a beautiful day here. Temperature's a little warmer. According to Thomas Jefferson, it's 84 degrees, 39% humidity, and 3 miles an hour wind, although it is just dead still right now. Dog days afternoon. That's the image that comes to my mind. Well, the convention is over, and the question is, where do we go with all this enthusiasm, and what can we expect to meet that we'll have to deal with along the way that will perhaps sway and persuade voters that what we're saying isn't true, or that there's some great damaging item that they should be concerned about that would trim the sails of our joyful and happy warrior march on the election in November. And there are a couple of examples that I think are helpful to understand what's going on, even though it may be superfluous to us who obviously share a common thinking about these things, or we wouldn't be together. But, and people are allowed to, indeed encouraged to disagree, because that's what free speech is all about. But here's an example that I think is helpful and instructive, is to study the players and how they act and decide, is this novel or a characteristic of the Republican Party and bad actors in politics. So let's take RFK Jr. and J.D. Vance. Now, anybody with even a short look back in politics says, how can RFK Jr. be in this situation? Nobody in his family thinks this way. Could it be those years that he was addicted? Nah, it's too long ago. But what's happened to the guy who was an environmentalist and then took on these crazy issues? It does feel like something is disjointed, or he fits a classical profile. That is, he's interested in gaining visibility, reputation, power, and, if he can, perhaps moolah. And the ruthlessness that his dad was accused of was to a better end. And the ruthlessness, you could say, were hard decisions that advanced a worthy agenda. So, but RFK Jr. seems to be interested only in himself. Now that's why I feel like pointing to J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, not too long ago, both he and his wife took a position similar to what most people who are enjoying this walk with me, I think, that you wouldn't want to shake his hand, you wouldn't want him in government, you wouldn't want to have anything to do with him. And then he changed. How did he change? He changed because he was picking power and prepared to say whatever was necessary to get there. Those of us who think of ourselves as policy wonks, but who've also had some practice in the gardens of politics, door knocking, active in the party, running for office, preparing material, advising people, chairing campaigns, all these things that you do and can do. And among those, what screams is, I used to have several C's I would talk about. The candidate, whether they have charisma or not, the content of their expression. And by those standards, what is their message? And in this context, they don't have to have a message. They just have to scream bloody murder and lie at every turn, because the ends are the only thing that matters, and that's where they're going. Now, unlike his dad, RFK Jr. Didn't have any long experience in elective politics. and service. Well, there are a lot of things. And I've known members of the family, Kerry Kennedy and Kathleen Kennedy Townsend years ago, and Joe Kennedy, and Patrick Kennedy. And so there's a screaming choice to serve that was never obvious in RFK Jr., the son of a name that is heralded because his commitment to issues and the people cost him his life. Now, RFK Jr. has been trying to deal with Trump to get a position if Trump should win. He's going to go on the stump with him. Stopped his own campaign for that reason. J.D. Vance is remaking himself on the fly to sustain his position on the ticket in case the dice roll and it comes up a winner. Now, Plato and Aristotle wrote about this dilemma, which is, how do we get politicians that are not going to be self-serving? What should be their call to practice? What are the considerations of that? And from time to time, we try to apply these methods. And one of the great stories, of course, is Aristotle saying if he only had a little more time to teach the heroes of the time, then he would have done better by them. In other words, he thought his principles worked, but he didn't get a chance to find out because Alexander found himself great, thought himself made in the image of gods and a god himself, and thought he could do anything. And some say he drank to death, some say he was poisoned, some say the wounds he had brought him down. But it underscores at the most extreme level a man with the capabilities to war, believed to have killed his own father to become Alexander. He just couldn't wait. And so, what is the similarity here? Well, when you believe you're a law unto yourself, when you believe you are a king, when you believe you're immune from all considerations, these things happen. And so when Plato and Aristotle taught ways to curb biases, few follow these things because the people writing the laws are the ones that are going to constrain and reduce their degrees of freedom by these laws. So our tools are clumsy. We have seen a great number of people get away with a great number of crimes and lies and so forth. And it doesn't help if the tools we have, constitutional, statutory, the pressures we have to shame someone, are clumsy and not used. This is a critical problem. So when Trump comes on the stage and uses the big lie, do know that he's not the first one to ever do that. Not in any place in the world, and not in America. Now, Thomas Jefferson, for example, was accused of being a heathen and worse. And in the early days, no, they didn't have social media, not like that. They often started up papers and underwrote them, and pamphlets appeared and circulated perhaps a little slowly. But there's an expression I remember from Latin class. It's funny how it comes into your mind, but the image I had that's prompted this is, imagine a fire catching on and rolling and causing damage and distress. And there's a phrase in the Aeneid, I won't say the nickname that we said about Aeneas, but fama rumpet, and that is that a rumor or a word rolls, and rumpet is a Latin word for fire, and so the metaphor carries the day. And so what it is if I say you sleep with sheep, some percentage will believe it. In fact, President Johnson, when running in Texas, he told his people to say something, and they said, well, that's not possibly true. He says it doesn't matter. When he denies it, we'll gain a point. So whether you think well or ill of Johnson and those who do this, it's not new. Now, in 1988, I've mentioned in the last couple of days, I was statewide co-chair with Bishop Willis from the south side of the state to support Jesse Jackson's efforts to become the nominee of the Democratic Party. Convention was held in Atlanta, and I was a delegate to the convention, and Jesse got to speak. But the delegates he got on Super Tuesday, including Virginia, were not enough for a path to the nomination. Mike Dukakis, on the other hand, he had it. He had the ability to be the nominee and was the nominee. And a college friend of mine, Frank Keefe, who was quite like my brother, in the sense of we were such good friends, and over the years we've kept in touch. You know, the gap's larger, but still it's like we pick up where we left off. And he was a Dukakis advisor, and jointly they took responsibility for the Massachusetts miracle. But funny thing happened on the way to the election after the nomination. The same game that can bring you down, that is lying, was at play. The same facility that Trump uses, the traitor uses as his own, but is merely passing on a highly questionable practice that's been going on for a very long time. I think it's useful to study an example of how it affected the Dukakis campaign. And there are a number of things, but one of them that screams is an interview given by Steve Sims, who was an elected official. I believe he was in Congress 3 or 4 terms, 2 years each, and Senate two times, 6 years each. And he was from Idaho, and he gave an interview on a radio station, and he said that Dukakis' wife, Kitty, had burned a U.S. flag. Well, all hell broke loose, and Dukakis' campaign manager said, lies move numbers. She said that in an essay years later. Very articulate, brilliant politician. And it just goes to show there's an element in which, I don't know, people want to believe it, like this and that. And so, you know, I tell clients sometimes, if once you're accused of a crime, however innocent you are, people start talking about how you take the garbage out. See, he takes the garbage out that way? That's because he's a thief, he's a this, he's a that. Now, where does this come from? Well, Steve Sims spread it out there and made it possible. But Lee Atwater was the nationwide genius because he was the GOP strategist. And he was dealing as an activist for the Republicans with a 17-point deficit for the senior Bush in midsummer. Dukakis was rightly on his way to becoming the president. But this lie and others about, mental ability and what one would do if your wife was raped and a whole variety of things just pilloried Dukakis. And so Bush, remember, down 17 points in the midsummer period, carried 40 states. And that's what we can expect for the rest of this campaign. We can expect this kind of craziness. Now, Lee Atwater And I take no joy in this. I'm just reporting a fact, because it's very interesting how these political animals without souls operate. Everything's a negotiation. Everything is a transaction. So Lee Atwater got sick, and he had cancer. And so he then had an illumination. He became a Roman Catholic. That was his choice. I wouldn't have advised him to do that. And he immediately tried to make amends for his entire life. And so he had pretty close to a deathbed conversion, and apparently didn't understand the basic cosmology or mythology of religion that kind of scorns these kinds of acts to publicly take ownership for something you did, and then still expect in the, well, I don't know, in the belief system of not just the Roman Catholic Church, that then you meet your maker and you make this argument, I cleaned my act up when I knew I was dying. Now, both the scripture in Matthew and experience teaches you that should not prevail. But, as I've said, I don't think the end of life is a pause. I think it's a full stop. I don't know if you find amusement, as I do, in Colbert's show. And he said he interviewed Arnold Schwarzenegger at one time, and he had a list of questions he was asking people so that they would be known. It's a nice gimmick. But there are several serious questions in there. And one was basically, do you believe in a life after death? And what Schwarzenegger said was along the lines of, why do you think I'm working out so hard? Why do you think I'm exercising? Now, I believe that Colbert must have understood. He was saying, I'm doing this so that I may live, because this is the beginning and the end of my consciousness. So, those who believe it, more power to you. And if it works for you, that's good too. But these people want to have it all ways. They want to do the bad act, enjoy the fruits of their misconduct, deceive us all, get into office, say as Bush did, as Trump did in 2016. And then, as the curtain is closing on their life, the coil run out, they then want an eternal life after the miserable life they led and the pain and suffering and hurt they caused. So, in the days and weeks ahead, for the 70 or so days we have before the election, we're going to see variations of this, big and small. And to try to change the value system of America, one example of that is that they're going to have a gala to raise money for the people in prison for trying to overthrow the government on January the 6th. This is a brazen way, I think, of saying we don't got anything else. We're desperate. I can only get 47% of the vote, which is not enough to win, even in the battleground states, or I'm not sure I can get it. So I have to begin working on Plan B, which will be some variation of what happened on January the 6th. And you can be sure they're talking about it. The question is, will they be doing it? And what we have going for us is we have advance notice. We have an incumbent president who will deal with it, who can do what Trump did not do, and therefore we can assure that if we win the election, we can continue the fight to keep the election and to beat back any effort by muscle or false rhetoric or lies to steal it from the people, not from Trump. So those are a few thoughts I have today, and I look forward to talking to you tomorrow if the weather holds up. And so I say goodbye to you from my cathedral of trees. Bye-bye.